This podcast is for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to Season 2 of Fool Me Twice. There's an accessibility transcript that can be found at our website, foolmetwicepod.com.
Beware, my friend, trouble roads are to come. Tall grass on the snakes fall not for their charm. Lift your head, forget the dance in your pride. Sometimes in life we need to be fooled twice.
Episode 2. Our Diamonds Forever. One day in September 1938, the 29-year-old Henry Oppenheimer, son of Ernest Oppenheimer, who had acquired control of De Beers after Cecil Rhodes's death, was traveling to New York. He had an appointment to meet with the Philadelphia advertising agency, NWIA. The 30s and the Depression had brought with them a slump in diamond sales, and Henry had been told that Aya was the best in the industry. He proposed an arrangement whereby the agency would seek to change the American concept of diamonds, following up on a memo inquiring whether the use of propaganda in various forms might make diamonds indispensable to Americans. Specifically, Oppenheimer wanted to implant a concept in the American mind that wasn't new but hadn't yet particularly taken hold. It was the concept of the diamond engagement ring. A campaign was proposed at $500,000 annually for the first 3 years. Adjusted for inflation, that's the not insubstantial sum of $9.2 million. A deal was struck, and the social rituals of engagement and marriage were never the same again. Chapter 1. The Accountant.
So my side of it is probably very different to everyone else's, except from Sally's, because I was not in the country. I was on annual leave in Sri Lanka. And I got a call from the girls. When I say the girls, I mean the sales girls and admin. And they said that they had a friend of Sally's who was interested in a massive sale. And then that was on a WhatsApp. And because I was on annual leave and they'd been told to contact Sally about anything big, I said, why are you calling me? And they said, because we need to verify that the money's come in. We can't get in touch with Sally. I said, all right. So tell me if it's going ahead. So then I think it was the next day that they said, right, she's come back and we've procured the stones, whatever it was, and we're going down with her to the bank to make sure she's paying for it. And I was checking out of my hotel at the time, and so I didn't have any Wi-Fi. And I said, right, well, I can help you if it's literally in the next few minutes. I can just quickly check the bank balance to check it's hit, but that's about it. I'm leaving now, and then we're going to be on a 4 or 5 hour drive cross country, and I won't be able to help you. I won't be able to check the bank. And you're very lucky I have my keys on me because I wasn't supposed to. Actually, I just out of habit, I had them in my handbag. Because this was meant to be actual annual leave, because Sally said, you haven't taken much leave, you tend to take your keys and just do your work, and I would prefer if you just take your annual leave. So I said, fine, I'll do that. So then they called again when we were loading the van. So I was still in the hotel's Wi-Fi vicinity. And so I logged on and I could see that the funds had come in and it said funds available. And I said, right, I can see them and they say available, and now I'm offline. So then we went off and we went wherever we went. I can't remember. I think it was from the beach side into the interior somewhere. And then the next day they called me and they said, we're really sorry to be a pain, but we still can't get in touch with Sally and we need to pay the guys who gave us the stones that we sold on to this client. I said, okay, all right, well, I'll get back on. And then when I logged on, I saw that it had been a check payment and it wasn't like an actual cash deposit, and it had bounced. Yeah, so that was what I experienced of it happening, but I wasn't there on the ground or could see their panic. She had told them, I think, that she was a friend of Sally's or that she was a friend of Sally's client or something like that. But I think how it happened was so many series and missteps and blunders on my part, on the girls' part a little bit. But why it happened, I think, is that there were no procedures in place. They didn't recognize that someone who just comes in and says she's a friend of Sally's, who knows? They didn't ask any questions about that. They didn't ask for any proof. And also they were kind of used to people coming in and requesting big stones or big ticket items, and we have the means to source them, and they could source them. So I guess they kind of thought of the prize at the end of it being the commission on something that valuable. And again, they didn't have a checklist of, if you've never met this client before, what do you do? And their first obvious recourse was to Sally, and then they couldn't get in touch with her. So I think at this point, what should probably have happened is the whole thing should have been abandoned. But myself not having the experience to tell them that, and also just being very in and out of the door and checking and not even being there, didn't. And they didn't know that they should have either. So I think that's how it all happened.
That's Sally's accountant, Anna. At the time, she worked as the finance manager for Ryder Diamonds. Here's forensic psychologists Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott Musgrove to lend some insight on cognitive biases, which is just one of the reasons the signs of this scam could have been easily missed.
Confirmation bias is one of a cognitive bias. A cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking. And specifically with a confirmation bias, it's the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of something that already exists in your belief. So it's taking your belief system or theories that you hold true and gives you a lens that is very narrow-minded. So not only do we sort of look through this lens at the world, but confirmation bias also shapes how we search for information and also how we end up recalling information that we consume. So with confirmation bias, there's 4 main things that we do that isn't necessarily correct. We don't seek out objective facts. We interpret information that is already supporting our beliefs. We only remember the details that reinforce that belief as well. And then we tend to ignore the information that is challenging those beliefs. So it is the opposite of critical thinking, if you want to put it that way, but it is just exactly what it sounds like, confirming the bias that you already have.
So one of the examples, especially in the American political landscape, that has happened over the last few years is that we've recently uncovered, which a lot of us that are critical thinkers knew this was happening, but now we have incontrovertible truth that there were many political Facebook ads that were being run by Eastern European bot farms. And what they were doing was pulling information from, a particular political group in our country, in our culture, and then using confirmation bias to slowly shift the narrative, to make it more and more extreme, and to put out more and more false information that only backed up this particular bias. And we are now feeling the result of it on a macro scale politically in our country right now and around the world. And it's one of the things that is really dangerous in the use of social media. People just inadvertently clicking and reposting things without putting detail into thinking, now, is this a legitimate source? Or even going further to what Dr. Shiloh was saying is, I agree with this, but am I just going to sit with my agreement, or am I actually going to read the article and see if it's a legit article? Like, I would love to think that the juice of this exotic berry cures cancer. I really want to believe that. But is that actually true? Is there a scientific study that backs that up? And if you dig deeper, you find that it's what I was talking about earlier, this sort of information loop that feeds around to something that actually isn't true. And I mean, I know that that's sort of a tangential example, but it's a perfect illustration of how our minds work. We want to create order, in our cognitions, and we don't want to be challenged. We want the easiest answer. And con artists use our desire to have the easiest and least complex answer to understanding the world around us. And that's how they can be successful.
It's clear that Tiffany was using the biases in the minds of the women working at the diamond business to her advantage. She told them that she knew one of Sally's friends, so they would be more inclined to trust her and see her as safe. She must have known that for the most part, people assume others aren't lying or out to steal. So she played nice, didn't draw too much attention to herself, and relied on the assumptions people make that people are generally good. On top of that, the accountant, in her rush to be helpful, didn't see through her biased assumption that if money showed up in the account, that it would stay there, because most of the time it does. And there was nothing to indicate to her that she needed to look any deeper than what she saw on the surface. Chapter 2. Hong Kong's in upheaval. Hong Kong is a place that, in more than just a few ways, seems to inhabit two opposing realities. It's at once a booming metropolis, the financial capital of Asia, and a busy port city with skyscrapers and an extremely high-tech and punctual transport system. It has the world's second freest economy, and it often trades places with first place Singapore on that list, which means it's a really good place to do business and trade. On the other hand, Hong Kong maintains a strong relationship to tradition. It's mostly populated with Cantonese-speaking Han Chinese, who can trace their lineage to Guangdong province. There are many more festivals than I could count or list, observing holidays like Buddha's birthday, Qingming Festival, the Lunar New Year, which actually gets 4 days allotted to it as a holiday, but also more obscure-sounding days like Grave Sweeping Day, where people will visit the graves of their relatives and ancestors, clean them, and leave offerings of things like flowers and paper money. Its official languages are English and Chinese, and up until 1997, Hong Kong was under British rule. Before Hong Kong was handed back to China, an agreement was reached that Hong Kong would be able to enjoy certain freedoms that don't exist on the mainland. It was summarized by the slogan, "One Country, Two Systems," and it was meant to allow Hong Kong to keep at least some separation from China and maintain its distinctly capitalist and somewhat democratic system. Last year, Hong Kong was in upheaval because since 1997, the Chinese government has been making inroads into overturning the relative, nearly democratic freedoms Hong Kongers had enjoyed. It started when a bill was introduced that would allow criminal suspects to be extradited to mainland China, where there's a notorious lack of due process. All year, young people, students, and eventually people of all kinds had been staging pro-democracy protests, rallies, and occupations. The protests began mostly peacefully, but only a month later began to escalate. In late July, nearly 2 million people marched to protest the police's heavy-handed response. People had taken to organizing secretly in encrypted message groups away from traceable channels. Teenagers started carrying gas masks and face coverings to protect themselves against the use of tear gas. Protesters stormed and vandalized the legislative buildings wearing hard hats. On October 1st, the same day that China was celebrating 70 years of communist rule, Hong Kong had one of its most violent days of protest yet. An 18-year-old was shot in the chest as protesters fought police using petrol bombs and projectiles. The Hong Kong government banned the use of face coverings. A man was set on fire by anti-government protesters. In August, protesters shut down the airport with a peaceful sit-in. All of this is the backdrop of what has been happening in this story. A country finding it impossible to reconcile its Western influences, while the motherland gets pretty insistent that it comes back into the fold. Chapter 3. Making Contact.
So I wasn't panicking, but in the back of my mind it was like, oh, that's a lot of money. I hope this is going to be okay. So I'm sure this will be sorted out. I was being optimistic. Anyway, we got back home and I said, so who is this woman?
Here's Sally's assistant who explains what happened when Tiffany visited Ryder Diamonds.
So basically, Tiffany had emailed Sally directly to her email address at Riders, and she had indicated that she had been introduced to Sally's contact details through a friend, and that friend had also bought diamonds from her before, and she was looking for something that would be around 5 to 6 carats, GIA certified round brilliant diamond, around a color E, VVS1, and XXX none. So Sally was away during this time, and the email was forwarded to me, and I was told to look after the client. So when I got in touch with the client, she had mentioned that she would be leaving for Canada to see her family on Thursday. I believe I had been contacted maybe a day or two before, so that would have been Tuesday or Wednesday, and that I would have to work quickly to find the diamonds before she would be leaving. So I reached out to my suppliers looking for something between 5 to 6 carats. This size is not readily available in the market, so there's only probably so many options you can gather. I probably reached out to maybe 15 to 20 suppliers. I gathered maybe 7 to 8 stones and updated Tiffany that, hey, I have some options for you, so go ahead and come in tomorrow around noon. So she came in and I presented the diamonds to her. We talked through the different options. I didn't just have E, I had D and E color. I believe I also may have brought in some F color, but in the VVS1 and VVS2. So we were going through the meeting. I asked my colleague to join in because it's such high value items that I didn't really feel comfortable to leave the room or just had these diamonds out on display because I had never personally met with the client before. So one of my colleagues joined me. I specifically instructed her to look after the diamonds and make sure that the client wasn't doing anything fishy. At the same time, there were moments when I had to go to the back to check prices. So I asked her to, be friendly with her and just keep the conversation flowing. So we were looking at the diamonds together, and she had interest in one of the stones, asked me what my best price was. And through our phone conversation the night before, it sounded like she was going to several other suppliers as well, or maybe not suppliers, but shops to view diamonds. I wanted to make sure I was coming forward with a really competitive price. So I didn't put probably a typical margin on the diamonds. I put a very competitive one. And so she seemed to notice that. She said that it was a competitive price, but that there were some stores that she had gone to where the diamonds were really highly priced. So then she started saying, oh, this is actually for my sister's engagement ring, but, the diamond prices look really good. So maybe I'll buy one for myself because it could be an investment and maybe I can turn it around later. And so she asked me if she were to go for 2 diamonds, what is the absolute best price that I can come forward with? So I went to the back, I did some negotiating with my suppliers and also looked at the numbers. And, I actually didn't change the price that much. Our margin became higher because I negotiated quite well with the suppliers. And then came back and presented her with the price. And she said, that's great. Why not? Why don't I just go for both? At that point, just to keep the conversation going, I noticed that her English wasn't great. So I brought one of the sales assistants into the room to help translate and speak to her in Cantonese, which she seemed more comfortable with. And that was where the sales assistant joined me to then further the transaction, I suppose. Once we created the invoice, she did say, okay, well, how should I pay? I can go straight down to HSBC Premier and I can transfer the money to you now. And at first she kind of said, oh, can I go with the diamonds now? And we said, no, you can't do that. We do need you to show us proof of the transfer. And then we do need to also check internally to make sure that the transfer has come through. So we accompanied her down to HSBC Premier, and she walked in like she owned the place, seemed like she was super confident, grabbed a ticket, went straight to the counter. And of course, we can't go straight to the counter with her. So we sat down in the lounge, and while she was doing the transaction, we're like, wow, this is it's pretty crazy that somebody can spend this kind of money so suddenly like this. And just, I guess that's just how it is with some people. And anyways, we were just having friendly chat. She came back from the counter, showed the sales assistant the slip, and it said deposit, transfer, or something like that. She took a picture of it. At the time, Sally was not in Hong Kong. She was actually in the Mediterranean on a cruise. And although it had said she would be contactable, obviously there's not a lot of reception out there. And despite us calling her several times, she wasn't available and we couldn't get a hold of her. And we needed somebody to check the accounts to make sure that the transfer had come through. So at that time, we reached out to our finance manager, who was in Sri Lanka on leave as well, and running around Sri Lanka with her entire family. We called her. She said, okay, no worries. Let me have a check real quick. And she looked at the account and said, okay, well, the transfer is reflected, so it must have come through. And actually, I did actually make a comment where I said, are you sure that can't come out? Because, this is a lot of money and the diamonds are of high value and she's going to leave soon. So are you sure it's okay? And she said, yep, no problem. There's no way it can leave. And, it was at that time that a couple of my colleagues, because I was in disbelief a little bit, it's a lot of money to drop on a Tuesday or Wednesday, whichever day it was. And, that was when the comment was made, you aren't a crazy rich Asian. So of course you're not going to be spending that kind of money. And sure, you're completely right. I'm not, I've never had that kind of wealth. So it is hard for me to imagine that someone could drop that kind of money all in one go. But, we're in Hong Kong. And there's a lot of people here who do have that kind of wealth. And we have had clients who pop in and spend 300,000 Hong Kong dollar on a Wednesday. Or, they come in and they inquire about something that might be up to $1 million Hong Kong dollar. And it's not really a big deal to them. So this is the city of wealth. It's everywhere. So, I had to then step back and say, okay, you're right. If we're looking from that perspective, I guess it is possible. And so maybe I'm just being silly, but maybe there was something in the gut that was pulling there. But anyways, I received reassurance from our finance manager that that money wouldn't leave the account. So at the end of the day, we have to give the diamonds over to the client. And then she walked out the door with them. So basically she had left. We thought, okay, done and dusted. I also updated Sally that, hey, the transaction did come through. Wow, we sold 2 5-carat diamonds. Great job to everybody. And really everyone did contribute to an extent. I believe the following morning, I was in a meeting with a client and a call came through. And I noticed that it was Tiffany. So I picked it up really quick and I said, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm in a meeting at the moment. Can I just please call you back after I finish? At this point, she said, can I please speak with the sales assistant? And, they had built a bit of a rapport because the sales assistant spoke Cantonese. So I said, yep, no problem. Passed it over to the sales assistant. And then I continued on with my meeting. I finished the meeting. When I come out, the sales assistant said, hey, she's saying that maybe there might be an issue with the transfer. She got a call from HSBC and they said that her signature went outside the box. So they wanted to double check if, she had signed under distress or if there was some kind of issue with the transaction. And she reassured us that she had told HSBC that there was no issue with the transaction and that is legitimate and that she just wanted to double check with us. And so, we said, well, thank you so much for giving us the heads up. Let us check our accounts. So we checked the accounts again through our finance manager who was still in Sri Lanka at this time. She checked the accounts and said, well, it's still there, so seems like everything's okay. And this is probably around noon the following day. So he said, okay. I called her back and said, looks like there's no issue at this point, but if HSBC calls you again, can you please just let us know and update us? And so she said, yep, no problem. And then in the background, we were working to settle the invoices with suppliers, because when it's that high value item, of course, our suppliers are going to be very keen to receive their money as well. So there were some issues around transfer limits. So again, we were trying to call Sally, but not able to get a hold of her. And even if we did, I'm not sure we could have done anything about the transfer limits because she was out of town. I think around 3 or 4 p.m., we got a message from the finance manager saying, oh shit, I think there's an issue. The entire amount has been pulled out of our accounts.
The girls told me that it had been withdrawn, and I said, well, that's impossible. At the time, I was still on this boat initially. It's like, that's impossible. If it was a cash transfer, the bank can't just withdraw money out of my account without my approval. How did this happen? And so my sales girl was, kind of confused, and then had to call our accountant to ask why. And it was discovered then that the transfer was not a cash transfer. It was a check payment. But she'd given us a fraudulent receipt that looked like a cash transfer. Anyway, the check bounced. My sales girl then told me that what had happened. And I said, well, where is this woman? Are you in touch with her? Do you have her ID? And do you have all her details? And they had an email address for her, a phone number. They had taken or got a copy of her Hong Kong ID card number, but Tiffany had scratched out the Hong Kong ID card number. I thought, well, wouldn't that be warning bells? Or I don't know, maybe she asked for the ID after the incident. I'm not sure. But Tiffany was saying, oh, that sounds like a problem with the bank. I'm in Canada now, but let me sort it out. I'll go to the bank and sort it out. So she was acting like there was no problem. And I think the following day I got back then from my trip and, back to this mayhem. And, I was like, well, what's the story? Like, she's taken the diamonds. She's in Canada now. When's she coming back? And then I got onto the phone with her, and she was always very, very responsive. Whenever we called her, she'd answer. She seemed to have legitimate answers. She said, it's a problem with the bank. I don't know why it hasn't cleared. And, I was like, well, you told us it was a cash transfer. It's a check. And she said, it was a cashier's check. And I said, no, it wasn't. And, that doesn't make sense. You obviously deposited a check at the bank, but gave us a receipt for a cash transfer. And she says, no, don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. It's just a problem with the bank. It'll be settled. And I said, well, can you please go to your bank and make the full payment now, because I have to pay my suppliers. I felt like there was a glimmer of hope, because she kept on telling us that it was all going to be fine and don't worry, I'm good for the money. And every time we called her, she'd answer. And then she said to us that she couldn't transfer the whole amount while she was in Canada. She'd have to come back to Hong Kong and go to the bank to do it. And I said, well, in the meantime, can you just online bank transfer your limit? Which she did. She transferred us 50,000 Hong Kong dollars per day up until the time that she said that she was coming back. And she sent us a copy of a flight itinerary from Cathay to show business class that she was travelling from Vancouver to Hong Kong on, say, a week's time. So she was due to return. And every day she was sending us $50,000. So I thought, okay, this might be all right. Maybe she's legitimate. And, by the end of the week when she was supposed to return, we'd received about $300,000 from her. I thought, okay, she wouldn't have sent us $300,000 if she was just planning on stealing these stones from us. I thought she would have just disappeared if that was your intention. But in the meantime, I thought I'd better report this to the police just in case it is fraud. So I opened a case with a police officer, went down to the Central Police Station, and I said, I don't know what this is, but it's dodgy. And I'm at risk of being the victim of a fraud. So I want to put this on the record. It might be okay because she is paying me some money every day, but maybe it's not going to be. So this just needs to go on the record. They were fairly accommodating. Yep, gave me a report number and gave me a case officer and sent me away. Hi, Tiffany. This is Sally Ryder. Can I call you now?
So sorry for late reply. Just back to Hong Kong now.
Okay. See you in our office at 10 a.m. Please bring the diamond with you that you have in your possession.
Okay. Thanks.
Then on the day that Tiffany was supposed to come back, send her a message in the morning saying, okay, we're due to meet at 10 a.m. I'm going to send you a message at 9 a.m. making sure that you're still coming at 10. please have both of the diamonds with you because they need to be returned until all of the funds have been transferred. So she said, yes, that's fine, no problem, I'll see you at 10 a.m. Following day, I sent her a message at 9 a.m. saying, I'm on my way to the office, I'll see you there in an hour. Then at 9:30, I get a message back from her saying, Sally, I've just been to the bank and deposited a check for $3.1 million, which was the balance that was then outstanding. Do I need to come in now? And I said, yes, you need to come in. I need to see that the funds have cleared. The diamonds need to be with us until the funds have cleared. And then she said, I can't now. I've got other appointments to do. Please just check the money. Trust all is still on schedule for you to come to our studio at 10 a.m. today. Look forward to meeting you.
I combined Hang Seng money and cash to you.
Tiffany, I cannot accept a check. Please return the diamond immediately until the check clears. If the money clears, we will send the diamond to you.
Is cashier order not a check?
Please show me a copy of the cashier check for proof.
Bank said cannot input more 200,000 cash daily. I input already. You call the bank and check?
I still want the diamond returned until all the amount is cleared.
If the check bounce, you can report the case.
No, this is unacceptable. Please return the diamond immediately.
Hang Seng cannot transfer to HSBC. I need to like this. How can I return the money?
Please return the diamond before you plan to take your flight today. If the money clears, we will send you the diamond immediately.
I put it to safe already.
I need the diamond back as a security deposit.
I took yesterday.
Please go and get it.
It's my friend, not me. She borrowed the money to me.
I don't care. Please arrange with your friend.
All money I deposit, how can I get back the stone?
So she was buying time at this point. I panicked. Instead of coming to my office, I went straight down to the commercial branch of HSBC. And she'd sent me on WhatsApp like a photo of the receipt of the $3.1 million check deposit. So I ran to the commercial bank. I said, I need to know where this check has been deposited. Tell me what check machine it's been deposited. And there was a reference number on the receipt. They told me it was a check deposit machine in TST, gave me the address. So I raced down there and demanded that the check deposit machine be opened. And they told me that they'd have to get a security guard. I was like the crazy white lady. Like, open it now! Open it now! This is an emergency! Get someone to help me! I was really, making sure that I was getting attention. And they did. They sent an engineer to come and open the check deposit machine. The check was recovered and it was written out for $31,000, not $3.1 million. So that's when my heart really sank. Tiffany, your check is proven to be fraudulent. $30,100 only. It should have been for $3.1 million. It is also not a cashier's check. No surprise there either.
I will call the police and explain.
Please come with me to the police now.
I will call them. You can check with them after 3.
Why can you not come now? Please collect the diamond from your friend Shirley immediately.
I cannot get back.
Where are you?
Kowloon.
I'm in Kowloon. Please, let's meet now.
But I will go to airport at 12:30. No, Sally, let the police follow this. I call my lawyer to follow.
You cannot leave Hong Kong without making the payment to us or returning the diamonds you have now stolen.
And you can call the police after 3. I will call them around 3.
Okay, we're just going to have to leave it to the police now. This is a proven fraud case.
Okay.
You have ruined my business, Tiffany. 10 years of my hard work. I have children to support. You're a horrid person.
No, I will pay you back.
I don't believe you. If you can pay as you say, send a cashier's check for $3.1 million today and you won't have any further problems. Please send proof of payment. So that was really the first time that I thought, shit, we've been taken. This is now a scam.
The next morning, Tiffany called them to tell them there might be a problem. Here's a story about losing a diamond under potentially shady circumstances.
My name is Beck. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I run a wild food foraging tour company. I never thought in my adult life or any time that I would own a diamond. I never had a desire for one, but when my grandmother passed a few years ago, I ended up inheriting a really beautiful 1-carat diamond that was hers as an engagement ring, and I got to learn the story of where it came from. So my paternal grandparents got engaged in 1943, right after my grandfather got out of the army. And he had bought my grandmother, not having very much money at the time, got her a really tiny little speck of a diamond as their engagement ring, the most that he could afford. And I think she loved it, but some years later, when my aunt was 6 and my uncle was 2 and my dad was not yet born, they were at Atlantic Beach on a beach trip at my grandfather's friend's house. My aunt told me they would go every summer and house and dog sit. It was just a block from the beach, and it was a really special time. But my grandfather wasn't there that year, and so they were down at the beach. My grandmother didn't like the sun on her freckly, delicate skin, and so she didn't like being out in it much, but was just sitting in the sand with the kids playing in the waves, and all of a sudden grabbed her hand and started looking frantically about her. And somehow she had caught her wedding ring, but both of her rings had slipped off and the engagement ring was lost. And so she and the kids spent a long time looking all around for it. They went back the next day and searched, but she had gone back to the house and called my grandfather and was just in such a state of distress, screaming and crying that he was certain that one of the children had drowned and been lost to the ocean. When she finally calmed down, he realized it was just the ring. He was much less concerned, but they never found it, of course. It was washed away. And when she got home, sometime later, my grandfather, since many years had passed and they had saved and were doing much better financially, he got her a beautiful 1-carat ring, which is what 1-carat diamond, which is what I have now. And the family lore that I had first learned about this was that some agreement that this sounded like something that my grandmother might have not totally done on accident, and some agreement that that would be fitting to her personality to have maybe faked the loss of this tiny ring so that now that they could afford it, she might get a larger one. That my grandfather was known to never want to spend money, and the only time that he ever did was at my grandmother's insistence. But it's unclear at this point. They both have long passed now, so maybe we'll never know the truth of whether this ring was lost to the ocean by accident and she just was lucky enough to grab her wedding ring and only lost the diamond, or if maybe the events of that day at the beach had been a little bit more planned in order to get an upgrade in the jewelry department.
Chapter 4: A Problem of Mass Psychology. By 1947, with multiple ad campaigns under their belt, De Beers and N.W. Ayer were well aware of the ease with which they could shape the American consciousness. Their beautiful and carefully written ads planted seeds of suggestion that grew into generally accepted truths. After the war, De Beers upped their advertising budget, and the agency released a memo detailing their newer, subtler plan to change people's minds. They broadened their audience to everyone 15 years and older. There were 70 million people who needed to be told in no uncertain terms that love means diamond and marriage means you better get one. The bigger the diamond, the greater the love, right? And the more subliminal message was, the bigger the diamond, the more the guy had to spend on his fiancée, and by extension, the more he was going to be able to support her and his family. Listen to this memo from N.W. Ayer that was sent to De Beers in 1952, detailing their strategy.
Our advertising objective is to leave the impression with young people that the diamond is the only meaningful symbol of the love inherent in the engagement promise. The advertising should be targeted at these young people, but in such a way that it will encourage appreciation of the diamond engagement ring tradition by the entire public.
A covert advertising campaign was launched. Soon, there were diamonds being featured in Hollywood films, written about in newspapers. Teenage girls were presented seminars on diamonds, and N.W. Ayer commissioned a series of portraits on socialites, emphasizing and commenting on their sparkling adornments. And it went beyond the US. Princess Elizabeth's engagement ring in 1947 and her coronation jewels in 1953 grew the public's interest in diamonds and furthered the idea that they were special, regal, and to be coveted. Using the glamour of Hollywood only served to make diamonds more visible and more desirable, as they were seen dripping from the necks, wrists, and fingers of some of the most beautiful and desirable women in the world. The agency's 1948 strategy paper was clear.
We spread the word of diamonds worn by stars of screen and stage, by wives and daughters of political leaders, by any woman who can make the grocer's wife and the mechanic's sweetheart say, "I wish I had what she has."
So, Sally finds herself without any answers or a plan, but a sinking feeling that she's been the victim of a pretty serious con. Next time you're here, we get to learn a lot more about who Tiffany is and what she's done. And it isn't very reassuring. We'll talk about the problem in our human tendency to believe by default that people are telling us the truth. Subscribe so that you have no chance of missing the next episode, Mining for Information. This podcast was created, researched, and edited by Jules Hannaford. And we couldn't have done it without Sally Ryder and everyone else who helped us to tell this story. We're infinitely grateful to our experts, Drs. Scott and Shiloh, as well as Roger Grimes, and those who lent us their voices, Kinney Orbarlo, Sonia DeAndrea, and Matt Schnuth. The theme song is sung by Angel Meyerhoff, and the sound design is by Shade Furlong. Please consider going to our Patreon and supporting us with a once-off or monthly contribution. I'm Zara Hannaford, and I wrote this thing, and I've been your host.